Is Ukraine launching counterattacks across the front line? From Kupiansk to Pokrovsk, Russian forces seem like they might be in retreat. But is this a localized effort, or is this part of a broader Ukrainian strategy, or just a Russian army that isn't as strong as they let on? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this has been an interesting kind of developing series of stories. Notably in Kupiansk sector, right? And you can see up here, right? This is the town of Kupiansk, which is a logistics and really combat hub for this northern front, right? And this entire area has experienced a lot less aggregate combat than the east, obviously, because it's an area that the Russians don't necessarily want to have direct control over. It's more for them about pressuring the Ukrainians, right? They control virtually all of Luhansk province. And so this time they're pushing into places like Kharkiv. And obviously the Russians are happy to take any territory they can, but it's vastly more important to them, both politically and kind of culturally, to annex Luhansk Oblast. But they are really trying to put a lot of pressure on the town of Kupiansk, which serves as, again, a hub for the larger defensive effort here. And it's also worth notable that it sits as kind of a fortress along the Oskil. It's very hard for Russia to conduct some of these river crossings. And the Oskil River has formed a pretty substantial barrier between Russian and Ukrainian forces. But you can see here that Russian forces have been on a steady campaign to sort of expand their bridgehead beyond the Oskil and increasingly try to put pressure on the Ukrainians in order to roll back Ukrainian gains. And Kupiansk is central to that. So you can see that just a few days ago, right, Russian forces have been kind of conducting this offensive effort, trying to encircle Kupiansk, pressuring it as close as Myrna. And that's, on the map here, from downtown Myrna to downtown Kupiansk is just 4 kilometers. Remember, in the era of the FPV drone, the fiber optic drone, 4 kilometers, you might as well be sitting on top of them, right? So the Ukrainians, though, have launched a localized counterattack to drive the Russians back over top from this roadway here, buying a little more breathing room for Kupiansk itself. Now, obviously, right, Russians seem to hold this last forested region right here, kind of on the outskirts of the city, and certainly there's probably not that many individuals living in Kupiansk still. Right. You can see even now Russian attacks have taken out most of the utilities in the town. There's no water, electricity, or gas in the region. They said actually despite being just 3 kilometers from Russian lines, about 1,800 civilians remain in the city, as opposed to 30,000 is their pre-war population. Right. And as even the Ukrainian government has said, FPV drones destroy most of the critical infrastructure, prevent the delivery of humanitarian aid. There's no electricity, gas, or water in Kupiansk, and restoration is impossible due to the intensity of the shelling and destruction caused by Russian troops. Right. They said actually on the city's right bank, about 1,000 residents are actually trapped without any basic services. And the Ukrainian government is like, listen, we can't get there, guys. There's nothing here. Right. And again, this being the right bank here, you can see that while the left bank of the town is going to be fed by these 2 major roadways, you can see that on the other bank, there's not really any roads, right? The only road drives you right to Russian positions. So everything here, supplies only really run from west to east in Kupiansk. And that's a huge problem. Again, given that there's only really a limited number of bridges across the Oskil. So if you want to cross, you've got to wade your way across. And I think this is seen, initially there was thinking that Ukrainians who didn't retreat from these cities were seen as Russian collaborators or people who are welcoming the Russian aggression. But I think it's shown that many of these folks are just very, very conservative, often older individuals who simply go, I've lived in this town for 3 generations. They'll go, listen, my grandmother is buried in the graveyard here. My father was born in that house. My mother was born 2 neighborhoods over. They're like, I'm not going to leave. This is my home. I don't leave my home, right? And again, when you're talking about a city of 30,000, 28,000 of those people have said, we got to go. And again, less than 10%, right? 5% say, I'm going to stick around. This is my home. So the Ukrainians increasingly are saying, listen, we just got to evacuate these people, or at least grant them the opportunity to evacuate. Again, when I was in Ukraine in November in the military zone in the east, I saw the areas inside the military zone where there was still civilians living. You could see them. You could see their cars. They were sitting outside of houses. And again, they were simply people who just did not want to evacuate, no matter how close to the fighting they got, no matter how hostile things became, and these were areas that were totally closed to civilian traffic. So it wasn't even clear how these people were eating. They were having to get water out of wells or wherever they could salvage. It was very bizarre. And that's true all through the front line. There are some civilians that survive all the way through the front line. Truly insane, right? But what I thought was also interesting is that there's reports that Ukraine is not just conducting this counterattack in Kupiansk, but actually near Pokrovsk, right? This is an article from, again, just a few minutes ago, September 2nd, where the town of Udachne has been taken back from Russia by Ukraine's 425th Regiment. And for 2 weeks, they said assault units have gradually cleared house by house and raised the Ukrainian flag over the village, right? And you can see it here. This is part, again, of likely a pushback against this encirclement of Pokrovsk. You can see Ukrainians driving back kind of the top pincer of the Russian claw looking to encircle the city. And you can see that after taking back Kotlina, the Ukrainians are now taking back Udachne. And you can sort of see tactically or operationally the appeal here, right? If they can hold the buildings in Udachne entirely, that would mean that the next covered and concealed positions for the Russians are very far away, potentially all 4 kilometers away. Because, well, if these are open farmers' fields, there's not exactly a place that the Russians can hide from Ukrainian FPVs. So the appeal of clearing out Udachne actually makes a lot of sense. And it would be, again, would it be a huge, stunning victory? Not really. But I think the real part that should be noted is that Russia is trying really hard to project this message that they are unbelievably powerful, that they are massively effective, and that they have infinite manpower. But that just doesn't seem to be the case, right? You can see Russian units are surrounded, cut off, and unable to be rescued out near Dobropilia. This is, again, from 3 days ago. And this is not something that a Russian army with near infinite manpower is going to be subject to, right? This is, I believe they're talking about one of these areas here, I think. But to me, when you see these and you combine it with the fact that Russian bonus payments have been rising, when you combine it with the fact that Russian tactics have actually been changing to use less infantry, you're seeing more and more that the Russian war machine is actually sputtering quite a bit more than Putin is letting on. And remember, when you're a dictator, projecting strength is the way you survive. It's not a nice to have tool the way in a democracy you have to balance projecting strength with things like the rights of individual citizens or the need for electoral stability or even to allow free markets to accurately assess what's happening in your economy. If you're Vladimir Putin, staying in power is the only thing that matters when the chips are down. So projecting that things are fine when they're not is something he is excellent at. And that's what he's doing diplomatically, acting like he is inexorably closing in on Ukraine. But the data seems to say otherwise, right? And again, is this like the Russian army is going to collapse this week? No. Is this that the Ukrainian army is going to inflict a stunning defeat on the Russians? No. But what I want to point out is that when I was in Ukraine 12 months ago in November, or 11 months ago or whatever, Pokrovsk was being directly attacked by the Russians, and it seemed like the Russian envelopment of Pokrovsk was inevitable. And that was 12 months ago, and the Russians have gone almost nowhere. They've seized towns around Pokrovsk, but they haven't taken the city. And this is not like a major metropolitan area, okay? This is, again, a town of a few thousand people, right? 10, 20,000 people. It's not even Kupiansk in scale. And so remember that this is a grinding war for the Russians where they are not achieving anything, where despite Putin's projections, they are bogged down, stuck in Ukraine's east, unable to break, again, a much smaller country who is being provided aid, sure, from Europeans and to a lesser extent now the United States. But it is a far, far cry from the potent, effective, globally feared Russian war machine that Putin's trying to project. If you guys want access to uncensored combat footage, including stuff sent to me straight from the front lines, sometimes even with units using gear that we purchased for them, you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com. That keeps me independent and enables me to continue to speak truth to power. The link is in the description. A huge thank you to our Colonel tier members like Thomas Anderson, Dan Cochran, Jalen Gow, Officer Merle, Deborah Oppenheimer, Paul JW, Jeff Javies, Mike 54, Supreme Margaret, GMAT Club, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. You guys are the OGs. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.